If you're joining us for the first time on ABC Chat, a huge, very warm welcome to you. You're joining 30 minutes of connection, reflection, a little bit of learning, all about trying to keep us connected even when we are apart. We're living in some pretty funny times, and we need new ways to keep us going, keep those bonds between us at what is a particularly challenging time. Every week, we have a special guest, and delighted this week to be joined by Charlotte Augst from National Voices. Charlotte, good morning.
Hello, Rich. Nice to see you.
And you, Charlotte, how have you been coping in lockdown times?
A bit up and down, to be honest. I think my cooking's definitely gone downhill. I'm so over it.
How low are we talking, Charlotte? Are we talking about just toast and beans or a bit higher?
Last night, I was properly despairing, I have to say. And I apologized to the children as I was serving it. But yeah, it's all been a bit like that.
Charlotte, thanks very much. Part of the point of this whole thing is to realise that we're not alone in going through some of the lockdown emotions we go through. Charlotte, I can imagine a lot of people going, yeah, I can remember times when I actually cared about cooking. Yeah. So I think there's probably lots of nodding. Charlotte, thank you very much. And I should have said at the outset, a warm welcome if you're joining us for the first time. But if you are back for repeat helpings, big welcome to you as well. This is the fifth of our ABC chats, all available on the Kaleidoscope YouTube if you want to catch up. And for those of you who have joined before, what you'll know is that it comes in two parts. So what is going on is that it's being live streamed over YouTube, and very warm welcome if you're joining us on YouTube, but we'd also love you to get involved on Twitter as well, please. So that hashtag is ABC Chat. Please do use that, ABC Chat. Please do use it both to respond to what's going on here, what questions we might throw at you, but also use it to reach out to people who might not have connected with otherwise. Like tweets, retweet them, reply to them, even send people direct messages. Part of what we're trying to do is to get people to make new connections in a new way. So please do use that ability as well. If you're joining us after the event, you're very welcome to use Twitter. Also, you may just want to comment on the YouTube video. Every week, again, for those who've joined us before, we throw our first question at you, which is very difficult, very challenging. We simply ask you who you are and where you're joining us from today. You get bonus points if you want to include a selfie in your tweet, giving us your name and your location, whether that is metaphysical, physical, geographical, whatever you like. And you get extra bonus points if in that selfie you manage to include some sort of ridiculous drinking receptacle. Charlotte, do you have any sort of vaguely ridiculous receptacle at hand?
I did go through my cover earlier because I've been told to. So this is actually my son's, and don't tell him, I think it's a bit ridiculous. It's a Harry Potter one. It was the best I could find. I think I've recently taken the really ridiculous stuff to the charity shop. And it says, I solemnly swear that I'm up to no good.
Lovely, Charlotte. Thank you very much indeed. Very nice mug. Again, previous viewers will know that I've been raiding my daughter's mug collection, but this week I've got one of my own, which is this sort of ridiculous Victorian tankard, which, Charlotte, we've talked about this before, is not a vase. It is a genuine glass of some description, but it's almost too big because you just look ridiculous when drinking from it, as if you were just drinking from a vase. Anyway, there we go. So please do share with us who you are, where you're joining us from today. Charlotte, you're also in South East London, in Balham, is that right?
That's Southwest London, I believe, but yes, South London.
Where's the dividing line between Southwest and South East London? Is there a marker?
Brixton, I think. Brixton has SW postcode and then it has SE postcodes, doesn't it?
Okay, look, as you know, on ABC Chat, we like to debate the hot topics of the day. So if you want to get involved on if you've got a ridiculous mug, or you want to debate where South East London stops and where Southwest London starts, you can do that as well. Charlotte, thanks very much. And we'll be coming back to you as we go through. So our first segment today is just to take a moment to reflect on what we've learned over the last week. So times are changing pretty rapidly. We are experiencing new things. Our work is changing in lots of ways. And we think it's really important just to try and take a moment just to notice how some of those things are changing, whether they're small or big. What we want to know, and please again do share views over Twitter, is what do you know this time this week that you didn't know this time last week? Charlotte, what have you learned over the last week?
I think it's something I kind of did know at one point before, but I'd forgotten because it's not something I normally do. And it's how I get a bit addicted to jigsaws. So we've got a big jigsaw on the go, and I find it really hard to kind of step away from it. I always think, oh, just this one. Where does this go? And it just keeps me, I'm a bit compulsive about it, I think.
Lovely. So what sort of size jigsaws are we talking about here?
1,000 pieces, which is definitely too much. Definitely too much.
Okay. Picture. What's the picture of your latest one? What do you?
It's a Moomin one, but yeah, a load of green, loads of poxy little flowers. Yeah, I'm a bit annoyed with it, to be honest.
So great. Let's just recap, Charlotte. So you're learning this week is you've got re-interested in jigsaws and are not particularly enjoying it.
Yeah, it's one of those like compulsions, you know.
Great, good. Well, I'm really pleased, Charlotte. And again, if you want to suggest alternative hobbies which don't frustrate Charlotte as much as she appears to be frustrated by jigsaws, feel free to suggest that. What have I learned this week? I've learned a couple of things. I've learned to be more careful when peeling sweet potatoes if you don't want to lose half your fingernail. That was particularly fun. But I think I've also learned that if you're not going slightly strange in these strange times, then probably you're not being quite honest with yourself. I think everyone is dealing with these times in strange ways, and I think if you're looking all around you thinking everyone else seems to be fine, possibly they just have slightly better acting skills, or there's a question yet to be asked. I think that's really noticeable, and so please don't. That's certainly what I've learned, that not to presume that everyone's fine. I seem to have spent a lot of yesterday cloning myself for the purposes of Zoom backgrounds. So I don't know entirely if my sanity is quite all right. But let's see how that goes on. So what have you learned over the last week? What do you know this week, which you didn't know last week? And please do feel free to share on Twitter that hashtag once more ABC chat. And please do keep those coming through. We will move on. And we move to our section, which we call Jackanory, which, if this was a different sort of show, we'd probably call our keynote speaker, perhaps, or our presentation slot, or something suitably grand and underlined. Is ABC Chat isn't that sort of show. What we do each week is we ask our special guest to tell us a story. That story is not directly about COVID. ABC is sort of a little bit anything but COVID, as well as apart but connected. But tell us a story, not directly about COVID, but with relevance to our current times. Charlotte, what are you going to tell us about today?
Thanks, Rich. I'm going to tell you a story about why experience matters in policymaking. And I wouldn't claim to be a general policy expert, but I do know a thing or two about health policy. So I'm going to stick to health policy, really. And I could make the point that if you don't understand the user experience of people who actually need health services, you don't know what problem you're trying to fix. I could also make the point that you don't know whether any policy solutions work if you don't understand what goes on for people. But I'm hoping to use a picture, which I think one of your colleagues is going to put up for me now, which I'm hoping tells more than 1,000 words. Is that picture up now? Cool. So what you can see there is what I think you call a cot mobile hanging over a cot. And I think it really summarizes quite nicely what goes on in a lot of policy making and who it's benefiting. So the parents obviously think they've hung up a lovely mobile over their baby's cot and the baby lies on their back with a very sort of limited perspective and really only sees bums of animals and probably won't be able to distinguish whether this is an elephant they're looking at or a penguin. And I think this sort of sums up quite nicely where we sometimes act when some of the policies that go over my desk seem a bit like, is this decorative? Is this so that people working in the health and care system feel like they've decorated the policy space? Or is this actually about providing stimulation to the user or providing whatever the user needs? So if you wanted to enter mobile cot mobiles into Google and Google some images, you'll find that 90% of these toys are designed exactly in this way, and that the baby on the whole is treated to a very limited perspective, and the action end is definitely where the adults are looking down rather than up. So who is this for? But kind of the jokey thing aside about why the user perspective matters, I want to make a more serious point, really, and I want to talk very briefly about Grenfell. You might remember that 72 people died in that fire, 70 were injured, some with life-changing injuries, and 223 people escaped the tower. And I don't think we're making too grand an assumption if we conclude that those people are harmed too, and that they're probably dealing with the aftermath of what happened on that day. And for me, I had never heard the word cladding before all of this happened, and I think none of us really had. And why would we? We're not in charge of what goes on the outside of tower blocks, but some people were in charge of that, and they had heard of cladding. But I would have thought that they had a blind spot. And I don't want to speculate here, probably also because it's subject to legal proceedings, whether this was a willful blind spot or a negligent one. But the people who lived in the tower block, sadly and annoyingly and infuriatingly, wrote to decision makers repeatedly and setting out all the things that were wrong that meant the building was a fire trap. And that included cladding and fire doors and fire alarms and the design of the windows and all the things you only know on the inside. And the people who were in charge of this tower, and I've never met any of them, but if they're anything like any of the other policymakers I know, they're not bad people. I don't think anyone gets out of bed in this country anyway and says, I'm going to kill some people today through my policy work. But they had a massive blind spot when it came to what was actually going on inside that building. And my sort of hypothesis is that it's in these blind spots where the harm happens. We are lucky in that we have, on the whole, decision makers who don't go out of their way to persecute certain people. Although we have witnessed in recent years some policies that felt a bit kind of like that. But in the majority where people come to harm, it's because we hadn't understood what actually goes on for them and how decisions we are making impact their lives. So very briefly, reflecting on that in the context of COVID, we are really entering uncharted territory with the kind of decisions we've got to make. And I think there's a big potential and a big risk that we have little Grenfells popping up, or maybe even really big ones, left, right, and center, that we don't understand because the people who are making the decisions, for example, aren't immune suppressant, aren't shielding, or the people who are making the decisions can get a test when they need it. So I think there's something there about looking at the world the right way around, and that means often from the bottom up. Thank you.
Charlotte, thank you so much. One of the limitations of this format is the inability for us all to rise collectively and give you a round of applause. But well, we still can. It's just harder. So I'm sure there'll be people around the country, Charlotte, wanting just to say thank you very much indeed. Really well said and really important points for our current situation, but actually for any situation about how we or how policy sort of missives which come down are crafted around users rather than decoration. And that decorative policy, Charlotte, is certainly a phrase which I will now be stealing and passing off as my own. I might reference you. Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. So it's over to all you joining and your chance to ask questions. And what we'd like to do is to use the format, use the distance we're all at by asking you to think about what's the question you'd really like to ask from the safety of your laptop, which you might not do if you are in person. So from the safety of your laptop, what one question would you most like to ask? Charlotte, lots of ways we could go, and I'll start off, if that's okay. Already, things starting to come through. There's a bit of an enigma here, which is sort of, I think your parallel between the mobile and policy sort of works quite well, because what the parents think they're doing is they think they're doing something nice for their baby. You have policymakers who, as you say, aren't bad people. They think they are doing something genuinely good and helpful. How does it go so wrong? Why do we end up with these blind spots when actually you don't have malice in the system? You just have something somewhere not being quite right.
I think some of this is just sort of human nature, isn't it? Is that we are very aware that we are the center of the universe, and it does take a certain effort to appreciate that everyone else also is a center of the universe, and that everybody else has their experience of the world. That is something that takes a bit of effort, isn't it? Just how we're made. There's actually a philosophical concept that describes that, called Zonda, which is a name of a consultancy group that we remember of, appreciating that everybody that you walk past in the street is also the center of a universe. Now, that's just human nature, I think. I think in health policy, there's an additional problem in that health policy deals with medicine, and medicine is a biological and natural science. And therefore, there is a sort of inclusion and exclusion of certain bits of evidence. So what counts for evidence in health policy is, I think, more bounded than it is maybe in other policy areas. If you do benefits policy, then you're less about, the molecules and the effects and the trials and all that. You're probably more into understanding how are people using benefits and all of that. So I think in health policy it's kind of made worse. And then I think sometimes those of us who are pushing to represent the user perspective don't do ourselves a favor either, in that we tend to think we just field a person and they tell their story, and that is then that taken care of. And that sort of plays into a certain complacency, possibly on our side and possibly on the side of the people who commission us to do this sort of work, as if that could do it justice, that we get John into the room and John talks about how awful it was to escape from Grenfell, and then we've taken care of that perspective and then we're done. And it's sort of, it doesn't treat the importance of this type of evidence with the seriousness it deserves. And I think my sector might have to do a bit of thinking there about how can we give this more significance and take it more seriously, so that it can stand up against medical evidence and managerial and financial evidence. So most meetings I go to, that's really what trumps the decisions in the end. It's the medical evidence and it's the managerial and financial one, and the user perspective, if it's at all introduced, it gets squeezed out at the end.
Charlotte, thank you very much. But we start talking about philosophical concepts. This is a 30-minute show. Sometimes it feels like it should be a 30-day symposium. So we're going to rattle through. But just say, I think if people do want to continue this conversation in lots of ways, Charlotte, I think people contact you through Twitter. Is that okay afterwards? Yeah. To talk further philosophical concepts. Thank you. Charlotte, lots of stuff coming through from Twitter. Unsurprisingly, comments such as "you're so right" with 17 different O's. So I think people are certainly agreeing. A lovely point from Sue. Thanks for joining, Sue. Just talking about that point of just imagining what people do rather than understanding, sort of being a real issue in causing frustration, lack of trust, fractured implementation of policy. Nice question coming through from Andrew. Thanks for joining, Andrew. Which sort of touches a bit on what you were saying, Charlotte, in terms of how groups such as yours can best help. Because actually just putting this all at the door of user involvement, and you need to speak to a person who has this experience, and then you will be, your policy will be cured. It's a model which doesn't have the greatest track record. Is there something here about helping policymakers and others making these decisions really understand the environment in which people are living, and whether that's actually sort of having direct exposure, sort of direct experience of some of those environments beyond just sitting in a meeting and actually hearing someone tell a particular view?
Yeah, I think we need to take inside work much more seriously rather than just involvement. You know, if you were BT and needed to develop a new whatever technology, you wouldn't just get a user into the room. You would do serious inside work, wouldn't you? So that needs to be taken much more seriously. But I think there's also really an argument about the diversity of groups of decision makers. And I think there's really good evidence now, and not that I could quote any of it, you know, I'm just picking this up on Twitter, that diverse groups make better decisions. And that's intuitively right, isn't it? Is that if you have some people who've grown up in a tower block and some people who've grown up in a mansion together, they will make better housing policy. And if you see the people who are now fielded at 5 o'clock every day, that is quite a hideously undiverse group of people, isn't it? So the NHS, as far as I can tell, has not really. Have we fielded any BME leaders? Has the health system fielded any BME leaders? I mean, I've just heard yesterday on a meeting that 90% of the doctors who died from a BME background. I think it's shocking that at the top of decision makers in the health system, it's still, you know, the snowy peaks and all that. And that's very much obvious. And the whole COBRA and the whole crisis team, I don't think there's any women on it. It just seems very kind of, it's like we've narrowed it right down again, and that can't help with excluding these blind spots.
Yeah, but sorry, we come back to this, more questions coming through. I'll come to. Well, I'm sure you could have that conversation. I'm sure you have had that conversation with many people occupying very senior roles where they say, absolutely, completely agree. We need to do better on this. And then we continue having this conversation. It seems like a bit of a cycle which we need to break in some way. So I think further reflections on that. But also a lovely point from David saying, well, is the issue here listening? Actually, have we got better at listening, but just not sufficiently good at hearing what's coming through? So is this problem about listening? So, or is it about actually making sense of what we are seeing and hearing?
I think it's both. I think it does take effort to understand what goes on for people whose voices aren't naturally kind of amplified. So we have to not just rely on the evidence that washes up of its own accord. If I wanted to find out how the Kardashians are experiencing lockdown, I could probably do so quite easily. But if I wanted to find out how the people who are still in temporary accommodation after Grenfell are experiencing lockdown, it would take a bit of effort, wouldn't it? So some of it is about the effort we put in, and some of it is, I think, to allow that moment of feeling destabilized by what you hear, because it kind of undermines your certainties, doesn't it? That not everybody has a front and a back garden, and not everybody has a bedroom they could go to shield from their family, and that not everybody has 2 bathrooms, and all these weird assumptions that have been made in the guidance around how we need to keep ourselves safe, and the role a park might play for people when they haven't got a garden, or a park bench might play for people when they need to walk to the shops, and all of that. It's sort of slightly destabilizing to realize that you don't understand all of the world. And it needs leaders with a certain degree of maturity, I think, to sit with that discomfort. Yeah. I leave it to you whether we have those leaders right now.
Charlotte, thanks very much. And questions coming through, and I love your one from Harry. Harry, thanks very much for joining. So coming back to this point about there's obviously sort of systemic issues here. Where what advice would you give, Charlotte, to a lone policymaker who again is nodding away, wanting to do differently, but actually feels like there's a wider system which may be hard to overcome? So for that individual in that particular position, what advice would you give about where to start?
I think you have to start by acknowledging that you can't know the whole world, and that but that there is, most of the world is knowable, and that there are people who know. So it wasn't like one couldn't know that Grenfell would go up in flames in 2 minutes. One could know that. I think, and I would say that, obviously, that there are charities and community groups who are much closer to this evidence and this insight, and to the people who hold it, than you can be from the centre of Whitehall, or you can be from Skipton House. and that's where there is a role for charities and community groups to play that translation, to interpret that evidence to decision makers. And it might seem like you need to make very rash decisions and you haven't got the time to make these connections. And I think sometimes that is genuinely the case. And I really don't want to come across as the person who said, when on the whatever it was, so-and-so of March, the lockdown was announced, they should have thought of all these things. They couldn't. They're also only people. But, as we make decisions about lifting of shielding or lifting of the lockdown, we can actually play this out in public. We can actually say we're seeking these connections. We can actually say we want to hear from people who are living. I met last week someone called James who is took himself to an Airbnb for the time of shielding because he couldn't keep himself safe with his family. We can find these people and they have a big, important story to tell about what it would mean to extend shielding, for example.
Charlotte, thank you very much. As always, time is against us, and I'm sure there are points that people want to follow up on Twitter, but also the National Voices website, a source of so many things which are good and right. Charlotte, a place for people to start in case of interest, just in terms of what some of the work you're up to share this wider experience.
Yeah, and we're launching on Monday. I was hoping we would launch it today, but we had to put it back a couple of days. A brand new website called Our COVID Voices, which enables everyone who has a COVID experience to tell their story in up to 700 words. We're very interested in the experience of people who've ongoing health and care needs, but anyone else can also contribute. And we've already got, because we've kind of soft launched under the radar through our networks, some absolutely beautiful, beautiful narratives emerging, sad ones. We're all have the tissues at the ready as these drop into our inbox. I'm really struck, having read now about 8 or 10 of these stories, how much sadness people are experiencing. And I've not actually heard from anyone who lost someone through COVID, but I think we've all lost a lot through what's going on.
Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. And we'll be sure to tweet further details of that really important project through the Kaleidoscope Twitter account, as well as following Charlotte for the National Voices. Charlotte, thank you so much for being with us, for telling your story today. I think this is incredibly important. I think people are absolutely seeing that in the terms of the comments coming through. And it'd be lovely, wouldn't it be lovely if we, hopefully we're out of lockdown by then, but if we could have this conversation next year and go, oh, and then everything changed. Let us hope for that.
Well, we're doing our bit.
We all do our bit. Let's meet back here in a year's time and see how far we can get. Incredibly worthwhile endeavour. Charlotte, thank you. With just a couple of minutes to go, we're going to move on to our final segment, which is just, we like to give an opportunity just to thank all of those who are helping us, supporting us in whatever way at this particular time. So a question for all of you joining is, who would you like to give a standing ovation to this week? You can let us know through ABC chat. I think probably most important that you let that person know, and feel free to find the way to do that. But whether that's a person in your life or an organisation or a group of people you'd particularly like to doff your cap to, do think about who you'd like to thank this week. Charlotte, who would you like to give a standing ovation to this week?
My standing ovation goes to all the mums and dads who try to work and look after children and possibly even educate them at the same time. And, a couple of people on my team have young children, and I'm just in awe of what they're trying to pull off. And it's, 20 years ago, we would have never expected that of people. We would have just mothballed work and told people to look after their families and then reconvene in 6 months' time. And now we're really layering on the expectations, and it's a lot. So thank you.
Charlotte, thank you very much indeed. And to absolutely echo that, every week there's an organisation which we like to thank at Kaleidoscope. This week's organisation is City Harvest London. It's a charity that's working to ensure that surplus food reaches people who are most in need of it at this particular time. So for City Harvest London, for all the mums and dads out there, for all others which people want to thank, we will give you a standing ovation. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And just to stay on that note, in terms of City Harvest, we're almost at our close. We're running a limited number of these ABC chats as Kaleidoscope. So we'd love your feedback. there'll be an evaluation form on Twitter as soon as we close. It's also in the details on YouTube, or shortly will be. And we'll be donating £3, 3 whole English pounds, in fact, at least 3 whole English pounds, to City Harvest London for every one of those evaluation forms completed. So please, if you could, if you're not really bothered to spend a couple of minutes filling in an evaluation form, think of it as being paid to give £3 to City Harvest London. So please do that. Charlotte, thanks so much indeed for being with us today. A pleasure and a privilege as always, and best of luck with our COVID Voices project. Sounds fantastic. This is a weekly show, Thursdays 11 Kaleidoscope YouTube. Next week we'll be joined by the lovely Will Warburton from the Health Foundation. So thanks all for joining. Hope you have a great week and stay safe. Goodbye.
See you soon. Bye bye.